there are generally two things that I want to focus on when presenting the creative to a client. And the first, and I think the most important, is the why. What is the justification for why we have done this, or why we've included this instrument, why we're including this long breakdown section, why this tempo, whatever it is.
Yeah, and there's a lot that goes into that. If you don't have the why, then why are you doing it in the first place?
Exactly.
I mean, it's hard to implement something that you don't believe in, too.
That's so true.
Welcome to Audio Branding, the hidden gem of marketing. Sound plays a more important role in human behavior and our decision-making than you may realize. In this podcast, I'll help you understand the art and science of sound so you can better influence others in business and your life. I'm your host, Jody Krangle. Let's delve a little deeper. This is the first part of my interview with Eric Singer. My next guest's first love was audio, but it took a while to get back to it. He's been with Coupe Studios for 16 years. But before then, he spent time as a magazine editor, a photographer, and even a semi-pro football player. I have to ask him about that one. Now a partner at Coupe, his focus is specifically on sonic branding and music for advertising and film. His name is Eric Singer, and I'm looking forward to hearing what he has to say about where audio branding is now and where it's heading into the future. How does he let their clients know that their audio is important? How does Coupe differentiate themselves in a steadily growing audio-forward market? Eric's answers to this are going to be interesting. If you're trying to decide why audio branding is important for your company, this discussion will give you an insider's look. As always, if you have questions for my guest, you're welcome to reach out through the links in the show notes. And if you have questions for me, visit audiobrandingpodcast.com, where you'll find a lot of ways to get in touch. Plus, subscribing to the newsletter will let you know when the new podcasts are available. And now, here's my interview with Eric Singer. Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
What early memory of sound do you have that moved you?
My earliest memory of sound is really one of my earliest memories at all. Mm-hmm. And it is of being on the floor of my bedroom and playing records on my Fisher-Price turntable.
Ooh, I remember those.
Remember, like a little suitcase?
I do. Yeah.
And my parents had excellent taste in music and apparently an inordinate amount of trust for me because they trusted me with their good records. And I would listen to Sgt. Pepper's and the Magical Mystery Tour pretty much every weekend. You know, I don't know what they were doing. They were sleeping it off or something, but I would just sit there and just devour those records. And I think one of the cool things about those records, besides the music, which is obviously iconic, is that they played with what we'd call now sound design. And I don't know what we called it back then, but it was just, you know, it was non-musical things, or it was music that was treated in a really creative way. You know,
Foley? I
don't know. Right?
Yeah.
You know, from simple things like just playing voices backwards to more, you know, soundscaping. And it just sounded like so much fun to me. So I think that's what planted the seed for me in terms of a love for audio. And then to continue with the botanical analogy, I guess the miracle grow that got dumped all over that seed. Do you remember the show Northern Exposure?
I do.
Okay. So I wanted to be Chris in the Morning on K-Bear. Remember the John Corbett character?
Yep.
So, you know, he's just so cool. He's got the long hair. He's an ex-convict, but he's a bookworm. He's this reformed criminal Renaissance man who's constantly being pursued by beautiful women. I was like, okay, that's who I want to be. I want to talk about Nietzsche and Kant on the radio in a station in the middle of Alaska. So that's just what I wanted to do. I got going on the Life of Crime thing immediately, and then I was able to start pursuing the radio dream my senior year in high school. Mm-hmm. I got to ride the short bus to the big school in our county where they had vocational training, and bizarrely, it was like auto body repair. grocery store management, and somehow radio fell into that vocational category. So it was
What?
it was this amazing opportunity,
That sounds awesome.
It was so cool. So I got to go up to this big school. I think it was 3 days a week. I'd spend the afternoon up there doing radio station stuff. So I got to have a show. I got to play records. I got to talk about the records. And that was, I think I loved the overall experience. So it wasn't just playing the records, but it was this multi-sensory experience where, you're looking at the album art, you're reading the liner notes. The center of it was the music, but I loved talking about it just as much. So that's kind of what got me going. I think I wanted to play music, talk about music, and I loved the format of audio only.
I love it. Yeah, so that's a great background. I mean, certainly you learn a lot about the music you're playing, and I guess that would give you a background in what to use for advertising. I mean,
a little bit, yeah. And
Yeah.
that was totally not on my radar at that point, but it started to get on my radar in college. So I went on to study communications. And I didn't know what I wanted to do with it, whether it was public relations or, maybe it was still radio. By that point, I'd realized that radio DJs made, minimum wage, and
nothing. Yeah, and it's gotten worse.
Totally. Didn't feel like a super viable career path. Plus, it seemed like Alaska was a really long way to hitchhike to. So I didn't know if I was going to pursue the radio thing, but I managed to get some voiceover gigs in college and then after college. So that kind of kept me loosely plugged into the audio scene and got me thinking about advertising. And then I got a series of jobs that were sort of advertising adjacent. I had a corporate job for this international company that was starting a new U.S. subsidiary, where I got to be exposed to advertising strategy for the first time. And after that, I was a public information officer for the city of Boulder. So I started writing for the first time professionally. I'd always been...
That's an interesting transition.
Yeah.
What made you do that?
I don't, like most things in my life, it's just been dumb luck. But I had sort of this PR background, and I had some interest in the stuff that the city of Boulder is a pretty unique place, in that they're very forward thinking in terms of taking the initiative in new technologies and things like that. So it was an interesting time and an interesting place to get to be the mouthpiece of a local government.
Sure.
And then that led me, after that, my next job was as a magazine editor. And
I see where this is going.
Yeah, it all this meandering path led me to where I am today. So I realized that, I'm an okay writer. I'm not great. I'm passable. But I found out that I'm a way better editor than I am a writer. Like, I'm great at letting somebody else do all the work and then coming in at the end and taking credit for it. And that's pretty much what my job is now. So, we have this extremely talented, dedicated team of composers and sound designers. And my job is mostly to stay out of their way. But it's also to serve as an editor of sorts. We were just working on a new overall audio brand package for a new client. And the initial round of demos was 30-second music pieces for a series of television and radio commercials. Okay. And we did 12 demos that were all really good. But 12 demos, that's way too many to present to a client. I think
that is true. Yeah.
Right? It devalues the creative when you turn around. Yeah. Okay. So we had it for 10 days. We did 12 demos. It makes it seem like less work is required there than actually went into it. It's just that our team is really good, and we have 3 composer teams working on this thing. So we tend to produce a lot. So, So
How
part
do you
of
whittle it down?
Exactly. So that's exactly it. Part of my job is often purely redactive. Just figure out which 6 of those, or maybe it's 4 of those, to present to the client, and that's an interesting art form in and of itself. And then another part of the job is more literal editing, where the composers will write up descriptions, and I'll rework those descriptions to kind of bridge the gap between the client and our creative team. So a lot of the job is also just translation, translating from musical language to non-musical language and vice versa. And I think I'm being self-deprecating about, most of my job is just staying out of the way, but in the interest of not devaluing anyone else who does the same role that I do, I'll say that the presentation of the creative sometimes is every bit as important as the creative itself.
I know we're all dealing with a lot these days, so I really wanted to acknowledge those that have gone out of their way to leave an honest review of this podcast. Like Martha, who writes, "Fave. Listening to this podcast really helped my company's audio branding. I love the 2-part episode with Tom Eamonson. They complemented each other well, too." Thanks, Martha. I really appreciate your comments, and I'm glad you enjoyed the show with Tom. That's one of my favorites, too. He was really great to talk to. And for those of you that are interested, you can also leave a voice review now off of the main podcast page. It's super simple and fun, and I'd love to hear what you think. Now, back to the show. Oh, yeah, sure. And I mean, you need to know what goes on behind the scenes to create these bits and pieces so that you know what to expect and so that you know what is good and what isn't good.
Yeah, exactly. I to give an example of that, one of these demos we just created, the composer made a very deliberate decision to record hand claps as part of a percussion part for the song.
Sure.
So part of my job when presenting that demo to our client is not just to call attention to it, say, hey, yeah, so listen, you'll hear some hand claps come in halfway through, but also to explain why we added that. And maybe,
what is it meant to make you feel?
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly. So maybe the simple answer is that even though the client is a tech company, we want the song to have a human feel because part of their brand DNA is people first, or some such corporate speak. But then, take
One would hope it actually has a basis in reality, but okay.
But often, we're dealing with abstract concepts like that,
Sure.
and we've got to figure out a way to express those sonically. And then you could take that a step further. So why did we record actual hand claps here instead of relying on the thousands of great sounding hand clap samples that we have in our libraries? And maybe that's because we want to introduce a feeling of imperfection. Without getting too esoteric, I think there are generally two things that I want to focus on when presenting the creative to a client. And the first, and I think the most important, is the why. What is the justification for why we have done this, or why we've included this instrument, why we're including this long breakdown section, why this tempo, whatever it is.
Yeah, and there's a lot that goes into that. If you don't have the why, then why are you doing it in the first place?
Exactly.
It's hard to implement something that you don't believe in, too.
That's so true. And I have to say that focusing on the why has not only improved our success rate in terms of nailing the ask in the very first round of demos, but it's also really improved our process internally also.
I was going to ask you what your process is, actually. Yeah, I'm curious because I imagine it takes quite a lot to get the client convinced that they actually need this in the first place. So how do you get them to think of this?
Oh man, no doubt. In terms of getting the client to think about this stuff and to invest in what it takes, because it's not insignificant. We typically will bid a project like this with a, kind of that classic gold, silver, bronze tiered pricing model.
Sure,
Bronze gets you the most basic package, that's entry level. Whereas gold is like, hey, if you gave us an unlimited amount of money, or a reasonably limited amount of money,
yeah.
here's what we would love to do for your brand. And most of the time, when clients do pick the bronze or the silver package, they end up adding things on because they learn themselves during the process. There's no better way, I think, to emphasize the value in what we do than by working collaboratively with the client or with the agency and really digging in deep. I think most people here would consider themselves artists first, but we're also data nerds. We love getting our hands dirty and figuring out, what's the strategy behind this?
Yeah, I'm curious also because one of my first questions for a client like that would be, how much money are you spending on license-free music from a directory? You know what I mean?
Right.
Because they're putting a huge amount of content out there, and if they're using a different piece of music every time, that's a lot of money they're pretty much wasting.
It is. I think you're so right about that being such a missed opportunity to, you're allocating dollars towards something that doesn't add to your brand equity at all. When you use...
Well, yeah. And also their competitor could be using the same piece of music.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, that's always a part of the conversation when we're talking with a client who maybe they've come to us for just an audio mix, or it's just, hey, yeah, we want you to find us a good voiceover talent. We're going to use a music track from Artlist or whatever. And it's challenging to be faced with that situation when what you're up against there is they're weighing, the example you gave, they're spending money each time they use a needle drop track. And that was the model of that it's been for many, many years. But these days with the subscription-based models where you can pay $15 or $30 a month for unlimited music, the financial investment by the client there is almost nothing. So it's very difficult now to make the argument of, hey, you're wasting your money on this royalty-free music.
Well, they still are, but
they are.
It's just a lot less. Yeah,
it's just the cost of lunch.
Yeah, exactly. But like I was saying, their nearest competitor could be using the same piece of music they are because they have the same access.
Totally.
So, yeah, why not be different?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really, really compelling argument to make, because nobody wants to, their CEO to see, no marketing director wants their CEO to see their competitors using the same music as them. And
oh, yeah.
So, as usual, a fear-based argument is often the most effective.
Well, yeah, unfortunately, that's kind of how us humans work. Sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes.
Totally.
Yeah.
To get back to your question about our process, I would say is about that initial brief. And most of the time clients come to us, even if they're working with an ad agency, without a brief. And that has its pluses and its minuses. It's nice in the sense that we can often get involved before they've really thought things through.
That is key, isn't it?
Yeah. It tends to be much more challenging to create an audio brand for an organization that already has either pieces of it, or they want it. They're just not sure what they want to do, but they have pieces that they need to retrofit. It's significantly.
In that case, I guess, wouldn't it be like an upgrade or like a refresh rather than?
Yeah. And
but
those
it's tricky. I understand.
They're tricky, although they're fun in their own way. We've done a few refreshes or versions of the McDonald's theme, ba-da-ba-ba-bum, we've done jazz versions or sleepy versions for breakfast offerings and all these things. And that can be really, really fun. When you've got a very tight prescriptive formula, hey, it needs to be these notes, this progression. That's a pretty simple ask, but
they've already invested in it
exactly,
too, right? Yeah,
exactly. But where it's more challenging is when it's a gray area. So we ask whether, no matter where they are on their brand journey, we ask a ton of questions, and that might range from overall brand things like, what's your brand purpose? And those might be things that get them thinking about themselves sometimes for the first time. Obviously, with a bigger organization, they've got brand books, they've got brand Bibles, they know who their brand is. But small, mid-size organizations or even large organizations that are new or doing a rebrand, that's a really fun opportunity to kind of get in on the ground floor and help them craft their overall brand beyond the sound portion. And then we'll also ask things like, if you could have any celebrity endorser, who would that be? And that may not, that's not necessarily about sound. That's not like, a question about if you could have a voice for your brand, who would it be? That's about the personality of that celebrity, right?
Yeah, their brand. Really?
Yeah.
Who do you want to piggyback on? Which brand? Yeah.
Exactly. And then, finally, we'll get to the audio stuff eventually, with questions like, many of us associate sounds with colors. If your brand has a sonic color, what is it? And that might be something from your brand's visual color palette or totally outside of it. It might be that your brand colors in your visual brand book are shades of blue and gray or something, but you want your audio brand to portray a sense of warmth. So that color might be yellow or orange or something like that. So
something complementary to the blue and the gray. Yeah, that's a tricky question though, because if your visual brand doesn't match your audio brand, isn't that like a disconnect that really doesn't work for your brand in general?
I think it can be. It's definitely a challenging thing, as I was trying to make the point earlier about about working with existing assets. That can be a real challenge, especially if it's an organization that's been around a long time and they may have brand elements that they're using that don't necessarily work for them. And that can be an awkward position, where it's a little above our pay grade to comment on what's working in your visual brand and what's not. So we try to stay away from that.
Yeah, that can definitely be tricky. And I mean, I guess it depends also on who you're talking to. Are you generally talking to the person in charge of the checking, like the checkbook, or are you talking with the person in the PR or marketing department who has to, work with the CEO of the company who may or may not like what they're doing?
Absolutely.
That can be really tricky, because then I guess you guys are even lower on that totem pole, and then you have to figure out how you're going to get anything done.
Seriously, yeah. We're definitely, it feels like audio is almost always an afterthought. So it's a tricky position to be in, but it's also kind of fun to fly below the radar.
Sure. Yeah, I can understand. Yeah. There's a lot that goes into it. Are you looking for ways to improve your company's or podcast's impact? You'd be surprised how powerful the use of an intentional audio branding strategy can be. Want to know more? I have a free downloadable PDF that gives you my 5 tips for implementing an intentional audio strategy at voiceoversandvocals.com/audio-branding-strategy. That location does ask to put you on a mailing list, just to send you updates on when the new podcasts come out. But if you really don't want to give your email out, I understand. Just contact me directly. My email is all over my website, and I'll make sure you get that PDF without needing to sign up anywhere. If you do sign up, though, you also get access to a resources section called The Studio, where I have videos, white papers, and PDFs, discounts from my guests, and snippets of audio from my guests that no one else gets to hear. So maybe it's worth your while. Totally up to you. And of course, if you're looking for voiceovers, you can get in touch with me about that too. Now, back to the podcast. So do people ever actually figure out the emotion that their company is meant to evoke?
They often do. They often have gone through that thought process as part of their visual branding development. But sometimes they may not have thought that through, or they haven't thought it through to the extent that's required to manifest something to reflect that. It's one thing to say, like, oh yeah,
right?
We want to have a human feel. Well, what does that mean? And I guess that's the second piece, getting back to presenting creative. You have the why. That's the most important thing. But the second piece of it is the emotional and the subjective aspects of it. And we have less control over that side. Sure. There may be a really great strategic reason why we chose, let's say, a piano as the main instrument in a piece of music. And that reason may totally resonate with, let's say, the agency strategist. But if the CMO of the client company was forced to take piano lessons as a kid and now has a deep-rooted hatred for that instrument, that track's probably dead in the water.
Oh, yeah. Well, as a voice actor, I get that all the time, right?
Totally.
Whether or not you get hired is totally subjective. Someone might love my voice, but another person, it might remind them of their ex-wife. And I'm done.
And there's not a damn thing you can do about it, right?
Absolutely nothing. Nope. That's just the way it is. Yeah.
It's
also, yeah, these sensibilities change geography-wise too, right? So the sensibilities that we in North America might accept could be totally different in, say, India, which is a huge market. So
absolutely,
there's all sorts of aspects of this that come into play. It's really fascinating, actually.
Yeah, it really is, and the idea of something totally subjective killing a really great piece of work is it could be really scary. Mm-hmm. And it becomes even more scary when we're not the ones presenting the work. Sometimes we work primarily with ad agencies. That's our biggest single category of client, ad agencies. And when we're not the ones presenting to the end client, we may make a presentation to the creative team of the agency, and there are times when that's it. We're done at that point for that phase of the project. They're going to go then to the client and present our work on behalf of us, and that may be because they're white labeling us, or it may just be because of internal politics or other practical reasons. And if it has to go down like that, I just try to arm them with all the best talking points.
This has been part 1 of our interview. I hope you'll tune in next week for part 2. Well, that's the end of this episode. Thanks for listening. And if you like what you heard, why not tell a friend about this podcast? It's available in all the usual locations. Until next time.